Has the obituary for CNN already been written? Welcome, everybody, into the Sanity Podcast. I'm Dave Briggs here with Alisyn Camerota, two former CNN and Fox News anchors. We approach every story with that background, and today that really matters. But first, please like this video. Please subscribe to the podcast. We are diving into our backgrounds today with CNN, with Fox News discussions, because the entire world of journalism seems to be collapsing right under our feet. And Alisyn, we couldn't have a better guest today to talk about that with.
I agree. Dylan Byers from Puck is here with us, longtime media reporter. Dylan, great to see you.
It's really good to see you, Alisyn. It's really good to see you, too. And I don't remember how often we got to see each other when we were at CNN, but it's been a minute, so good to see you.
Yeah, you too. So you have a lot of deep dive reporting on CNN, and the way Dave framed it makes me sad, not just because I have a lot of warm feelings and friends at CNN, but because CNN has been such a stalwart in the journalism space for decades. I mean, it is and has been such an important channel. You know, I mean, for everything, I think back of how we were all glued to it on 9/11 and the Iraq wars and everything. And so the idea that CNN is sort of being shed until it's a shell of its former self is kind of heartbreaking. But you have all the latest reporting. So what is happening at CNN right now?
Well, first of all, just to that point, I totally agree with you. It is really hard to think about certain brands or institutions, particularly at the global level, and think about them no longer being there. Like, it's hard to imagine the world without Coca-Cola, right? Or, you know, like, I don't know, America without Ford or something like that. You take it for granted that CNN is going to be there as an institution because outside of the BBC and in some parts of the world, I guess Al Jazeera, but really the notion of like a global 24/7 news force that could be responsive to anything that happened in the world and is almost thought of in that way as a commodity, as something that like will always be there for us. It is really hard, and I think hardest for the folks who work at CNN to internalize the fact that that might actually be shrinking and be falling apart in the way that it is. And look, in many ways, this has been the story that's been going on at CNN for a really long time as the technology has changed, as distribution has changed, as just consumer behavior has changed. But there are certainly things that happen at the organization by virtue of who was in charge and who was running the place that changed that. You and I both worked under Jeff Zucker. Jeff Zucker made CNN very relevant in the culture for a long time. I don't want to overstate it. Like, right now, CNN is probably, you know, at any given moment, somewhere around 500,000 people are watching CNN. When he was doing it, it was probably over 1 million. In the grand scheme of things, those numbers aren't different, but you could feel CNN in the zeitgeist, in the news, as a relevant force in, certainly in politics and also in global news, in a way that you just don't feel that anymore. In many ways, for anyone, I'm 39. Anyone of my generation, I think if news breaks, you take what's going on between Israel and Iran right now, going to CNN is an afterthought. For folks who are younger than me, it's not even a thought. It's not something you do. And it's because CNN failed to create the sort of product on the right platforms that would be relevant to those audiences. Now, in the course of that time, a lot of other things happened. There was, you know, a CEO in Chris Licht who was really, frankly, bad at his job and didn't do a great job. There was his boss, David Zaslav, who ran the company in such a way that now all of his cable assets are going to be spun off and shrunk. So there's a lot we can there's a lot we can unpack there. But the fact is that CNN, by virtue, I would say, of its ownership and its leadership and then larger macroeconomic forces, failed to adapt to the next iteration of how we consume news and how we engage with news, and therefore failed to be relevant to younger audiences.
I too, Dylan, worked under Jeff Zucker, and I know he's a dear friend of yours, Alisyn. I'm curious if you're letting him off the hook at all in terms of when I was there, and Alisyn and I argue about this often.
Yeah.
Every day I came in and argued with the powers that be about obsessing over the Russia investigation when no one I know off of the East Coast gave a damn how that investigation ended. And to me, that's when they lost 30-40% of the country. And I think the ratings kind of back that up. So technology is one thing. Do you think they failed in terms of the direction, the content, and the true balance?
Well, there's certainly a political argument to be made there. And one thing that I think Zucker tried to account for, which was a very serious existential challenge that has been CNN's challenge going back long predating his arrival at the network. You have to account for the fact that Israel is not always going to bomb Iran. There's not always going to be a January 6th. There's not always going to be an election. And you have to create some sort of programming that is compelling and interesting. And if you remember at the beginning, that didn't start as a partisan thing. An airline would go missing, a cruise would get moored off of the coast somewhere, and he would go wall to wall because he understood the need for narrative and the need for a developing storyline that people could come back to night over night. With Trump, which became this sort of, I think we can agree now, 10 years after he came down the escalator, I think we can agree that was sort of this all-consuming story that you went all in on. And Trump made maintaining a level of balance and nonpartisanship extremely difficult for practically every news organization out there. And did CNN as a network need to tack so aggressively against Trump? Or I guess I would say pro-truth was, I believe, the marketing campaign. I don't know. And I certainly think that no doubt Republicans, certainly pro-Trump Republicans, completely cut the cord with CNN back then. So there's a political element to that for sure. I would also argue that I think if you look at the research, that CNN for a long time has not been particularly, certainly in like the Fox News era, has not been particularly popular among Republicans anyway. And if you look at the attempt that the Warner Brothers Discovery administration made to try and claw back some of the Republican audience, it's a really, really hard road to toe when like the position of the Republican presidential administration is anti-media, is one that doesn't frankly, and I'm not saying this, I'm not saying this with any partisan agenda here, but like just doesn't hold truth and fact in terribly high regard and is willing to it finds those things to be somewhat malleable. I'm not saying that doesn't happen on the Democratic side. Surely it does. But I think it was always going to be hard to position CNN as a pro-truth, pro-journalism, accountability journalism network in the Trump era and do that in a way that didn't alienate Republicans.
I totally agree, Dylan. I mean, that's it. They're actually mutually exclusive. Our mission, it was accountability, holding people's feet to the fire, pointing out their hypocrisy, illuminating their falsehoods. By definition, Donald Trump's going to get caught in the crosshairs of that.
That's right.
And you can call it anti-Trump, but if you're pro facts, they are mutually exclusive. And
but Alisyn, it was that obsession with. I mean, when I would talk to my friends across the country, and I mean, not on the East Coast, outside this bubble in which we all exist, they would always say to me, I just want to know what the hell else is going on in the world. That's what they would say to me every day. And that's what led them away from CNN. And I was anchoring it every morning. And that's what I saw. I know you don't feel that way, but that's what I saw.
Well, can I just say, by the way, there were a lot of correspondents and journalists inside CNN who wondered when the hell they were going to get airtime because the only story was the Washington story.
Yes.
Now, I guess what I'd say to that is they're just two very different schools of thought, and neither one is perfect. Because if you recognize that cable news is a dying medium, and it was dying when Zucker took over CNN, and he plus Trump gave it this sort of bubble that would have inevitably burst at some point. But if you accept the premise that in order to sustain this business, you have to make it interesting beyond those like major news breaking events when only CNN can compete, and you have to give audiences a reason to check in, because frankly right now the thing used to be major news would break and people would come to CNN. Major news breaks now in countries oftentimes where Fox News doesn't even have cameras, and people still go to Fox. They've stopped going to CNN, not just for domestic breaking news, but and frankly, they've stopped going to cable television by and large. So I understand the Zucker school of thought, which is let's give people an incentive to come. I also understand, if you're thinking over a longer time horizon, the incentive that the one thing CNN has, especially in this moment, and you guys talk about all the time in your quixotic quest for sanity, is like, what about just the integrity of the brand as a reliable steward of information? Now, you can do that. It's helpful if you're the BBC and you're taxpayer funded, and you're government funded, and then you can just sort of, you don't have to worry about the vicissitudes of the business. But in CNN's case, like, as we're seeing right now, if you don't figure out how to be relevant to the culture, you're facing an existential challenge. And just doing a milquetoast down the middle boring thing is really hard. And it is very hard to create compelling, engaging programming that is down the middle. It's much easier to go and like light your hair on fire and scream about somebody or something and get a small audience than it is to just go on the news and sort of tell people what happened.
For sure, Dylan. I'm so glad that you bring that up editorially, because what is this, intoxication with down the middle to begin with? I mean, when Jeff was the boss and we were there, I remember that one of the things that I loved about that time was that we didn't have to play it safe. I never got an instruction to play something safe. And so what that meant was that I got to do lots of important, I think, relevant, I think, memorable interviews with the people surrounding Donald Trump and Trump himself. But I mean, the Kellyanne Conway, Ben Carson, Corey Lewandowski, Rudy Giuliani, all of those interviews were kind of these calorie burners, for me at least, because I would be armed with facts. And all I was trying to do was get them to explain the falsehood that they had just said, get them to explain the hypocrisy from the position that they had had a year earlier or 6 months earlier. And it ended up, that was what I thought our mission was. And I don't see that happening. Now, mind you, at some point they wised up and Donald Trump started blacklisted. I mean, basically I was blacklisted. He wouldn't be interviewed by me anymore. Shortly after that, he wouldn't be interviewed anymore on New Day or Chris Cuomo. So they stopped coming on CNN. So that's hard to hold people's feet to the fire if they won't come on. But I also do, when I tune in, see people playing it more safe. And I don't know if editorially if that was a directive.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people at CNN who have whiplash from the various directives or lack of directives that they've been getting about what their posture is supposed to be. But yeah, there was definitely a moment, Alisyn and Dave, where your former colleagues went through one iteration where they could almost be accused of grandstanding that they were going so hard after the administration, to another posture, which was like completely just sort of tolerating and glossing over things that they would have gotten really worked up about in Trump 1.0. Right. And yeah, there was this mandate from came down basically from David Zaslav through Chris Licht to basically say, like, we're not that kind of network. We're not the kind of network that just like stands up and we want this to be a place where Republicans can come to. The problem that I mean, there are a lot of, and I've spent far too much time writing about all this, but there are a lot of problems in the way that mission was executed. But the mission itself was perhaps always destined to fail, again, by virtue of the fact that one, CNN had built up this other kind of brand for itself, and then two, that Republicans didn't want to play in that space. They didn't want to play in the space where they where we could all agree on the facts and we just had different opinions about the facts. Like, they would just come on and just say things that weren't true. Yeah. And the mandate coming down to anchors and correspondents oftentimes was to like not push back too hard against that. And that, frankly, it's not great journalism. It's also just not great programming.
Yeah. And that's what I see right now is there's this misnomer that down the middle coverage has to be boring and it has to be milquetoast. You can be passionate on both sides of the aisle. And one story I've never shared with you, Alisyn, or anyone, frankly, is here's an example of what I thought the problem was better than the Russia investigation. When I was at CNN, I was asked just after Parkland, after returning from that horrible shooting, to cover the gun story across the country. And I said, I would love to do that. And the plan was to be embedded with David Hogg And I said, great, let's make sure we get to Wyoming and Nebraska and cover the people that actually do believe that they have the right to have a Second Amendment and hold a gun and own 10 or 12 guns. And I was quickly cut off from the project. And that is what I mean. That was a real opportunity to show we do hear you in the middle of the country. You're not all complete nuts with AKs or ARs. Some of you are actual educated gun owners.
Yeah, for sure. Dave, I'm surprised to hear that story because I don't see CNN as a bastion of only the liberal perspective. I mean, I think that to Dylan's point, it makes a lot better programming. And in my experience, right after Parkland, I was able to book a real gun enthusiast many times. And then I saw him on many, many shows. He's really articulate about the fun of guns, the beauty of guns, why we love guns. And he was all over the network after I booked him. So I guess I would just need to have more information. That would be really disappointing if it were just that they don't want to have that represented. But I find that hard to believe because I just think that,
It was unfortunate. It was really left a bad taste in my mouth. Dylan Byers with us. He's the founding partner of Puck News. He worked at NBC, obviously CNN and Politico. Great to have you, Dylan. One of your piece recently that I referred to as a bit of an obituary on CNN. Inside knowledge for those of you watching, we all prepare obituaries in the cable news and newspaper business on people that may die soon. And that's what I feel like is happening right now. You write that CNN over time will look more and more like HLN, which is one reason HLN no longer exists. You write what's ahead is significant layoffs, diminished resources, and persnickety indignities. This split off or spin off, whatever you want to call it, and the incoming of Gunner. What does it mean to everyone working at CNN right now?
Yeah, well, they're just obvious signals, things that happen that sort of can tell you that you don't even need me. If you put Gunnar Weidenfels has been known for one thing since the merger of Warner Media and Discovery. He's helped David Zaslav, the CEO, take the debt from $55 billion down to $34 billion, which for that company has been the North Star of what they're trying to do. I mean, even the executives are even compensated according to their ability to reduce the debt. If you believed that you were going to take the cable channels, CNN, TNT, TBS, et cetera, and that they were going to have some bright new chapter of growth, you wouldn't put the CFO who's been doing all of this cutting in charge. He is there in order to extract as much value from these assets as he still can. Let's remember, CNN still makes a lot of money. At the height of the Zucker Trump era, it made $1.2 billion. Now it's probably more like $750 million. We're at the point in this story, we've seen it happen in the record industry, we've seen it happen in the magazine industry, where you recognize that the decline is irreversible and it's going to start happening faster, and now is the time to liquidate and extract as much value as you can. Does that mean CNN is going away? No. CNN will continue to exist. It will just be a lot smaller, and more people will be asked to do more for less money, and it will just feel it won't feel like this massively significant force in our politics and in our culture. It will feel like something that is there where someone is paid not $18 million or $10 million or $7 million to read you what happened in the news that day, but probably $300,000 or $400,000 to tell you what happened in the news that day. They will bring their own powder, and
the indignity. You're right.
But in many ways, this is funny. I got a text message from someone at CNN after that story came out, and they said, this is already happening. And it's not, I read about this industry and I sort of know what will get people's attention. And I know that the indignities of, doing your own makeup and all that. But the truth is that where you really feel this is that it affects the product, both on the linear television side and on the digital side, which is someone leaves or gets fired, an editor, and they don't get replaced for a year. Someone says, you know what, I have this great idea for this story. I want to go out to middle America. I want to talk to gun owners. And someone says, I don't know if we can afford it. I don't know if it's core to what our goals are for this quarter or for this year. And it just becomes a sort of shell of its former self. And
Totally agree.
there are 1,000, not 1,000, but there are probably a dozen different businesses that are still with us today, but are long past their glory days. Take People Magazine, right? Or, something like that. Take MTV. MTV is a perfect example. Is MTV still there? Sure. Is it the MTV we all remember? Of course not.
I totally agree with you, Dylan. But the problem is that we knew that MTV was a confection and we knew that it was a luxury. But to your original point, CNN did feel like a birthright for Americans. For Americans of a certain generation, it felt like our birthright. It felt like it, encapsulated democracy and our window into the rest of the world. So, nobody does it better than the CNN foreign correspondents. Nobody. I mean, I'll watch Clarissa Ward do anything. I'll watch all of those correspondents go to Syria. We don't have that window into the world without CNN. And so
that's right.
It does feel really imperative, to keep it. And if you just drain it to a shell of its former self and peel it back, then it's just not big enough. It's not big enough. It's too small. And that's, the problem for viewers, I think.
Yeah, that is the problem for viewers. And it's also, again, what you guys are doing here is a response. It's sort of part of your mission statement. It is a response to the cacophony, the sheer chaos of information that is out there in the world any given day. And increasingly, in a sort of like Elon Musk owned X, right? Or just in the Trump era generally, or TikTok, whatever, it's increasingly hard to know what to trust, what's real. And CNN provided this really authoritative voice that could tell you, that could not only get to like the blast radius in almost any country around the world, but could also like help you parse fact from fiction, which has never been more essential now than at any point, certainly at any point in my life. And it's expensive. It's really, really expensive to sustain that news gathering infrastructure and those resources that can be deployed at any time. To just have someone at a bureau where nothing happens for 6 months or 18 months and then boom, you're there. If you don't have that, it's not to say that reporting won't go away. There are going to be a lot more people on the ground who are going to be able to produce that and get it to you faster by virtue of social media, YouTube, what have you. The question is are you going to know who to trust, what to trust? And that is a value that CNN has provided for a very long time.
Who to trust and what to trust really impacted by AI, which I do want to ask you about in a minute. Yeah. But now CNN feels like Enatech, and it feels like the Bobs have moved in.
There's 3 more people we can easily lose. And then there's Tom Sinkowski. He's useless. Gone.
Sounds good to me.
Here's a peculiar... Milton Wadhams.
Who's he? Squirrely-looking guy, mumbles a lot.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we can't actually find a record of him being a current employee here.
I looked into it more deeply, and I found that apparently what happened is that he was laid off 5 years ago, and no one ever told him about it. But through some kind of glitch in the payroll department, he still gets a paycheck.
So we just went ahead and fixed the glitch.
Great.
Great. Sorry, I had to make light a little bit of the situation, only because it's probably my favorite movie of all time. People could not get enough of the fact in your piece that Anderson Cooper makes $18 million a year. That was probably the one thing that got picked up the most. And that Jake Tapper makes 8 figures as well. How in the world did anyone, look, I love AC. He is brilliant. He is talented. How in the world did anyone, given his ratings, sign him to that contract, and how long can that last?
Yeah, well, you have, what I would say about contracts, a lot of these are become baked in over time. And you take someone like Anderson Cooper, who in a previous iteration of CNN was like a real star, right? And, it sort of had this, like, he was a household name. And, in some ways still is. And what'll happen to him? I think I think Anderson's probably a really smart guy, made a lot of money, probably getting really exhausted of doing this for a smaller and smaller audience, and will decide, like, you know what, I do want to stay in television journalism. I got a job at 60 Minutes. I'm going to keep doing that until who knows what happens to 60 Minutes. And I don't need to go down with this ship. That is my assumption of what will happen. The Jake Tap. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go. I want to hear about Jake. Go.
I was just the Jake Tapper thing too is, look, will anyone else in the future of CNN get paid $10 million? Again, no. Did Jake get there over the course of time at which he was like sort of instrumental to the network's political coverage at a moment from, let's call it 2015 through now, when CNN went all in on politics? Yes. And can you understand his value in that regard? Does he probably, is probably like drives a hard bargain and whatever, there are ways of getting there. But there's something telling about that detail. As you shrink a business, you still have to sell the business, right? Like the business still people still have to know what it is, even if you're shrinking it. That is a moment at which you start paying everyone else less and less, but you pay a few people a significant amount in order to have them be the sort of marquee stars of the business. So it is not like Caitlin Collins probably gets paid around $3 to $4 million. It's not like all of a sudden someone's going to walk in the door and say, hey, now Caitlin, now you make $1 million. They're going to tell everyone else these jobs now are $300,000 a year. Caitlin will make $3 million, and maybe one day she'll make $5 million. But you need to have a few stars in the system who you can use to market the product, no matter how much it's shrinking. And then everybody else makes less. So it's the middle that gets cut out. And it's the hope of anyone who joins CNN and says, oh my God, I'm coming in at 200,000, but maybe one day I'll make $1 million. And then maybe one day I'll get my own show. Like, those days are done.
That's sad. I mean, because that is the aspirational model that we all came up with. And it is not, journalism's hard. It's hard to work those hours.
Incredibly hard.
It's hard. It's hard to go on the road. And I remember, Dave, when we were in Parkland together and you were sleeping in the van and our producer hit the brake and you tumbled off onto the floor and like broke something. And so it's hard to be on the road all the time, all that stuff. And so what you hold out for is, and someday I'll have my own show and make a lot of money. And so that's a shame. So, Dylan, one of the things that happens, I do a lot of speaking on journalism. People are always very interested in what the future of journalism is. What I tell them, and I hope I'm not spinning some sort of fairy tale, but I want to get your take on it. My take is that these legacy media, these crown jewels, 60 Minutes, CNN, as sad as it is, they are shrinking. They are being tested by market forces, by Donald Trump, et cetera. However, it's this, 500-headed monster where if you get rid of 60 Minutes, it's not like those journalists go away. They go to Substack, they go to YouTube, they go to a podcast, they pop up. And in some ways, in that way, it's harder for any president to fight it because suddenly there's Dave and Alisyn on Sanity and there's Dylan at Puck and there's all sorts of little seeds being planted. Right. So to me, the future is not grim in that way, but maybe I'm gilding the lily. So what do you think?
No, I don't think the future is grim. And look, there's always going to be some sort of demand for news and information in some way, shape, or form. And some of it will lean more toward entertainment. Some of it will lean more toward what feels like sort of a responsible part of being just a civically minded adult. But what I would say is that institutions matter in terms of having the heft and the power to make like real impact. And so I think of there was an essay that John Harris, one of the founders of Politico, wrote a while ago on the 10th anniversary of Politico. When they started, they were a startup. There were two or three scrappy guys from the Washington Post who just sort of came over and decided they were going to try and do the Washington Post faster and better at a moment when the Washington Post was vulnerable. And they came in and they ate their lunch. And now Politico is Politico. When they got to 10 years, John Harris said, the thing that we need to do now is we actually need to not be scrappy. We need to be a like formidable global organization that has the power and the resources to actually stand up to an administration like Trump, which, as we've seen through Brendan Carr, his FCC chair, is willing to come after media organizations left, right, and center over like what totally baseless and meritless claims. So there are seeds being scattered to the wind, and they will grow into new things of different strength and different influence. But at some point, again, we go back to what we were just talking about. The power of CNN was it was this authoritative brand that you knew you could trust. And right now, people are being asked to sort of self-curate. They say, like, okay, I want to read Puck. I want to watch Sanity. I want to listen to The Daily or The Bulwark or whatever. But it's just it's a lot being asked of the consumer, and it's a lot of news literacy that you have to develop over time. And I do think that I think that the last century of consumer behavior suggests a desire for authoritative voices and authoritative brands. And so I think over the course of time, we'll see some of these seedlings be sort of bundled up and bundled together back into institutions.
Yeah, I've heard whispers of a Substack news network being formed, which makes a lot of sense. I tell you what, I would pay good money for wherever he is, whatever cave he's in. Shep Smith, get out of that cave, pair up with Anderson Cooper, give me the AC and Shep podcast.
But see,
I'll watch that.
Why not with us?
7 days a week.
Why aren't you asking
We're
Shep
good.
to pair
We're
with
good.
us?
I'm just saying, I love those two. The way I think it'd be an interesting dynamic. The other thing I'd like to see CNN do something interesting. Hire Tara Palmieri to do your morning show in a podcast style, or let Michael Smerconish simulcast his radio on the TV. He's really great television. Do something interesting that shakes it up, right, man?
well, yeah, if I may, yes and no. So here's what I would say. During the election, Amazon decided to dip its toe into the news space, and they got Brian Williams to anchor a show out of LA, and they got Jonathan Wald, old CNN producer, to produce it. And they brought in the Shep Smiths, and they brought in, like, it was I'm blanking now, but it was like, they got the band back together, right? And there is something to that for a certain audience of a certain generation. But the fact is, the platforms themselves are shifting. The technology itself is shifting. You look right now, I think today, the day that we are speaking, was the day that streaming overtook the combination of broadcast and cable in terms of just hours watched or time spent. And that's as Bezos would call it, that's a one-way door. Our entire sensibility about what works and how it's packaged is going to have to change. And what's happening now with people going out to Substack and doing what we're doing now, or what the Don Lemons or the Jim Acostas of the world are doing, that is a bridge toward an entirely different sort of distribution that does not look like this and does not feel like this. And so I would love to see some bolder moves out of cable. 100% I would. Because right now, man, it's, it might be an inexorable decline, but you don't have to wave the white flag that quickly. That said, like, the future of news and the future of entertainment does not look like picking off the right former cable stars and putting them back together. It is a different generation, and it is a different different style.
As a podcast, Fox News, meanwhile, I just checked some ratings. The top 14 rated shows in cable news by demo, all 14 were Fox.
Haven't they long had that?
Yes,
well, and right now, at any given point, 65% of the total cable news viewership is watching one network, Fox News. Is there any breaking of that model ahead?
No. And here's what I would say. A couple things just to help contextualize that. In the win column for Fox in that regard, they have long been dominant. They've long been the dominant cable news network. They've increased their dominance a lot in this particular political era, and also by virtue of just how far CNN and MSNBC have fallen. The big thing that's happened for them, which has something in common, I think, with the larger attitude of the business community toward Trump 2.0 versus Trump 1.0, advertisers came back in to Fox. So it wasn't like, it used to be like Fox had all these ratings, but no one except for like Mike Lindell wanted to touch it because it was Fox and it was political anathema. Now it's like, it's the main event. Yeah, in the television news space. I mean, it beats CBS Evening News. Bret Baier beats CBS Evening News now. So it's Fox is sort of been accepted as America's News Network, which again, going back to like the integrity and the authority of CNN is a really hard thing for me to say and to stomach, but that's the fact of the matter.
Yeah.
The thing the thing I would just say is Fox's dominance is because it has managed to decline slower than the rest of everyone else. But it's declining. And it is not the cable business or the television business itself is not going to stick around for Fox News. That too will disappear. And Fox will just be able to ride it out a lot longer than the CNNs and the MSNBCs.
They're up 20% from the 24 election. I mean, that is a staggering statistic in this day and age. To be
It's great for them.
Yeah. Would be impressive.
No, it's a great business for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because what we used to think was that the Fox audience was dying off because they were older. They were markedly older than MSNBC or CNN. Yeah. I mean, all cable audiences are older, but they were old. And apparently they've regenerated.
That's right.